G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. Today we're going to have another look at the upcoming national draft, this time with a bit more of a focus on pick 26. Now, the last couple of videos, I've gotten the habit of saying, hey, Eagles fans, and I noticed in the comments there's heaps of people that are not Eagles fans that watch this channel regularly, which I really appreciate. So special shout out to you and anyone who has subscribed. Recently, we just passed the 4,000 subscriber mark. We zoomed past it. So thank you so much to everyone who's jumped on board. I intend to make this a long lasting and hopefully valuable Eagles fan channel. So I appreciate anyone who watches it. If anyone's unaware, I also do a general AFL channel called True Footy. I cover everything on the AFL and I will be doing heaps of draft content as we get closer to that as well. And in fact, I have a mock draft that should come out any day now. But back to this video. Okay, so we're going to be talking specifically at pick 26, what kind of selection we want to take with that pick. Bearing in mind, I've narrowed it down to about 7 or 8 players here, but that's quite difficult with a pick this late. It's not extremely late. Like, we're still in a decent part of the draft here with 26. I think Matthew Clark himself said 25 to 30 is the top end of this draft. But there's just so many different variables that can happen between picks 1 and 26 that will influence who's available here. So rather than get caught up into narrowing it down to 7 or 8 players, there's still so much that can change in terms of our perception of who's going to be available. Nonetheless, I've done my best with what I know so far, and I've got a few names here that I think would make sense for West Coast. And I've got a few names here that's probably in the right range for us, but probably don't make a lot of sense. So to give you an example, Alex Dodson's the best ruckman in this draft, but I don't think this is the best way to spend our pick if he is available there. Now, I've seen in the comment section a few people have nominated the ruck as a position of need. I do agree. I just don't think that spending one of our 2 picks at the moment on a ruckman who is 18 and highly speculative is the best use of our assets going into this draft. I mean, we do need to improve who our best ruckman is, but drafting an 18-year-old isn't going to solve that issue. I mean, we drafted the best ruckman in a draft 2 years ago in Harry Barnett, and we're still not really any closer to knowing whether or not he's going to make it at AFL level. So perhaps one day down the track, we'll recruit a mature age one, but for the purposes of this pick, I don't think it's the right choice. A couple of small forwards, Ollie Hannaford, Jesse Tatoli, those guys could be available, but I really just don't think we need to draft a small forward. Would I hate it? I would probably back the club in to say this guy was too talented to pass up. But in terms of positional need, I'm not going to focus on them in this video. And some key forwards like Jack Whitlott and Jonty Fall could be available and would be great talents, but really not positions of need. So those are just some exclusions. We'll talk about some players that we both need and could be available at 26. All right, let's start with Cooper Hines, a 190 centimeter midfielder forward from Vic Country. Now, big disclaimer on Cooper. He's one of those players that at the moment seems to get rated around the late 20s, but more and more I'm seeing more fans in particular catch on to how good and how talented he actually is. And sometimes that precedes them bolting as a player. So I do hold space for the possibility Cooper Hines is long gone by our pick, but let's include him anyway. I don't think at the moment it's a long shot. He's a very strong and powerful midfielder. Is that something we need? Yeah, probably. I mean, Ruben Junby was probably drafted as that big, powerful inside mid, and right now he probably looks more like a defender. So then you got Hewitt and Reid, and these guys aren't small, but they're not quite the same size as a Cooper Hines. And ideally, like, Harley Reid is as strong as anyone you could think of, really. But you kind of want him being the receiver of a handball rather than the guy at the bottom of the pack. I think Harley's the sort of guy who's going to try and do it all. But I'm just making the case that him, Elijah Hewitt, even Chad Warner, if we end up with him, need someone to feed them the footy in an ideal world. So Cooper Hines being that powerful inside mid is a good asset to have and still, would have a place in our midfield. He's also got some forward craft. He kicked 23 goals this year for Dandenong, and he's quite an explosive style player as well. So I think, we could do a lot worse than getting a Cooper Hines in this year's draft. Now, again, he may not be available at 26. Do we trade back into this draft? I think the answer is a resounding yes, but I did see Tim Gossage on Twitter. Big disclaimer, Tim Gossage is known for getting things wrong. However, he was asked if West Coast would trade a future first, and he said absolutely no way because we've got all eyes on Chad Warner next year. So again, take it with a grain of salt. It's just, Tim Gossage on Twitter. But perhaps he's heard that West Coast are going hard at a Chad Warner and therefore are not willing to trade a future first, and therefore by extension, whatever pick we're aiming to trade back into this year, it's probably going to be between 25 and 40. Best case scenario. Maybe West Coast sees like the kids after 40 to 60 as being worth trading back in for with a future third. It's possible. But yeah, anyway, moving on. We'll talk about Tom Gross. Now, he is another midfielder forward, this time from Vic Metro. Unlike Hines, he's a bit on the small side. He's 181 141 centimeters. He's a very contested style midfielder, so he'll throw himself at the ball maybe like a Lachie Neale. That kind of style of midfielder is who we're talking about, a guy who gets his fair hands on the footy first. He also has some forward craft as well, plays as a half forward, which is a nice attribute to have, although I'd be thinking I'd want to draft him as a midfielder primarily. So again, I go back to the argument that, yes, we've got Harley and Elijah and, potentially we'll trade for Chad Warner, but I think a genuine inside mid who gets clearances and wins the footy and hands it off to the others, that is still an area of positional need for us. So Tom Gross, I think, does make sense. And look, in my mock draft, I had him going in the top 20, but it's still very open-ended as the way that this actually plays out on draft night. So I don't think saying 26 is too late for Tom Gross, but it may well be. Harrison Oliver is another player that I like, completely different to the other two players I mentioned here. He is actually more of a defender, and he's on the small side at 181 centimeters, and he's from Vic Metro. What I like about him is he's a good defender. He has good defensive application, but he also uses the ball really well and offers some rebound too. This is an area of positional need for us, definitely. Someone who can use the footy out of the back half and be a good defender. So we just cut Rotham, we've just cut Witherden. Our depth in this part of the ground is not great. It's not diabolical, but we can certainly add to it, I would have thought. And therefore I line up someone like a Harrison Oliver as probably being right for West Coast. I could definitely see him coming in and not being that far off a game, partly because of our depth, but because of his ball use and skill, I think he could slot into an AFL best 30. The knock on Harrison Oliver is just that he doesn't get a lot of the footy. So the more I think about him as a prospect, I'm starting to think 26 might be a little bit early for us to spend on a small defender who you can tend to get later in drafts, but a player I'll highlight as probably being of need in terms of the type of player that he is and his attributes, but maybe one that we consider for a trade-in after pick 40. Look, if West Coast trade in for pick 41 and take Harrison Oliver, I'll be stoked. If we just take pick 12 and draft Harrison Oliver at 26 is just a little bit expensive for the type of player he is in a pretty strong draft. That being said, on talent, I do rate the kid. Let's talk about the West Australian Hamish Davis. He's an interesting one that is bolting in some places, and in other places, I think maybe not even top 40. I've seen one mock draft that had him in the top 20. So he could go anywhere. As I record this at this current point in time, it's unclear where he's going to go. However, 26 at West Coast is not wildly unrealistic. So let's talk about him. He is a forward midfielder that genuinely has the ability to play both roles really well. So if I'm not mistaken, started as a forward, has no trouble finding the goals. I think he kicked 14 goals in 9 Colts games this season, but he also pushed into the midfield and played a little bit there for WA in the under-18s championships as well. So he finds plenty of the footy and he kicks goals. And he did have a game in the Waffle League in a final where he kicked 4 goals and had 21 possessions. So what are his positives? Well, he's got great endurance. He has no issue with production. He finds the footy. These are all things we need. We do need players who can run from contest to contest, provide options, accumulate the footy. This is something we desperately lack right now. He's got versatility to go forward and hit the scoreboard, and he's a pretty high IQ midfielder, I'd say. What are the downsides on him? Maybe his ball use. I mean, he's not necessarily a precise kicker of the footy. He's super athletic. He's evasive. He gets away from players, but he's not the most accurate kick of the footy. Now, he doesn't make a lot of mistakes from what I can see, but you can kind of tell, technically, his ball drop is a little bit off, but that's not a massive red flag for me. I do like that he can run and accumulate really well. So again, I don't think he'd be in line for our first selection, even though some have him top 20. But if he's still there at 26, I do think he does add something we don't have with his ability to find plenty of the footy. We do need those kind of types to complement what we already have, who are pretty high impact players in Elijah Hewitt, Harley Reid, and of course Chad Warner, who's definitely coming. Let's move to a not dissimilar player in Christian Moraes. He has fallen down the order a little bit from the start of the season at least. He's a 183 centimetre wingman from Vic Metro. So again, another player who can run all day. He's also quite young. He's still 17 if I'm not mistaken, which implies that he's still got some more growing and developing to do. Obviously, being 6 months younger at my age at 30 means nothing, but when you're 17 against 18-year-olds, it kind of does. The thing that's good about Moraes, he does find plenty of the footy. I think he averaged 26 disposals as a bottom major last year and 24 this season. So he's got no production issues. He also hits the scoreboard a lot. So another player who's got running power, another player who hits the scoreboard and is quite damaging with it. In fact, for Eastern Rangers late in the season, he actually had a bag of 5, which is not bad from running off a wing. But similar to Davis, and possibly more pronounced, his ball use can be a little bit off. So again, we're talking about a high capacity, high running, great endurance player who hits the scoreboard, but his ball use can let him down. So is there a massive difference between Davis and Moraes? Davis is a fair bit bigger at 190 centimeters versus Moraes, and I think maybe has a slightly better contested game. But on paper, there's a lot of similarities there. Let's end this video with a couple of talls. Now, I did say I wanted a key back in this year's draft, but I've only listed a couple key position players in general. Fact of the matter is, as I kind of understand it at the moment, there's a lot more key forwards going than there are key backs at this particular range, but we'll see. Maybe we trade back in and draft a late prospect or rookie one, I'm not sure. But let's talk about a couple of options. So we got Matt Whitlock here. He is Jack's twin, 199 centimeter key position player from Vic Country. So with Matt, the reason I put Matt and not Jack is Matt was primarily a key back. That did kind of change this year. He went forward and he kicked like 27 goals this season. So he's a very good key forward prospect as well, which makes him a really strong prospect. And it's unclear exactly where he's going to go in the draft. So what I like about him is 199 centimeters. So when we're looking at our young key backs, okay, we got Harry Edwards there, still unproven. He's 200 centimeters. But behind that, Rhett Bazzo, 195, is not quite the same sort of tall lockdown defender that we would like to add to our list. We do need to complement that with another fairly big one, I would have thought. You need a variety of types, and Whitlock as a genuine 200 centimeter player, or at least he will be, I'd imagine. I think on talent, this would be a great selection. Is there a risk of drafting Matt Whitlock if his twin brother gets drafted to Richmond or something like that? Maybe. Do you reckon that comes into the minds of recruiters thinking? I think possibly. So that's an argument why we wouldn't get him. But, on talent, all things being equal, if we have pick 26 and we take Matt Whitlock, I think that is another pick that suits us. And another WA boy, let's talk about Cale Guerin. And I had to double check how to say this because I read that as Gerain. I guess we're forgetting the Y's there, but that's fine. I've butchered that many surnames since I started YouTube. I've just gotten used to it now. So yeah, Cale Guerin. Please correct me if I've got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure the commentators are calling him that, which doesn't mean it's right, but let's talk about him as a prospect. Now, Cale is a 199 centimeter ruck forward from West Perth, so two positions I said we don't need to draft for. However, sometimes with key position players, if they have the attributes to play defense, you can turn them into one. He hasn't played a lot there, but he is a very talented kid, I reckon, and possibly a little bit underrated just from my uneducated opinion. Very agile for a big man, good contested mark, very well performed in the Colts. I suppose what might work against him is that the Waffle Colts competition is not considered a really strong competition when you're comparing it to like the Colts Talent League. But he's got great mobility. He's West Australian, so again, like I would throw him in here as a player around this range. We don't necessarily need a ruck forward. So yes, you might say that we need a ruckman, but he's kind of a ruck forward. And if he becomes a fully fledged ruck, then he's a little bit undersized, and we don't really need a key forward at this current point in time. However, I do think he has the athleticism to potentially turn into a defender. To be honest, a lot of key position players in their junior years play a multitude of roles to prove that they're versatile, and then they settle into one position at the next level. So I'll just throw that out there as a possibility. Cale Guerin on talent, like I do like the look of him. He's pretty dual-footed as well. Just a good footballer, I think. Again, as a key forward ruck, if we draft him as that, turn him into one at 26, I don't know if that's the best use of that pick, but maybe West Coast draft him and say, hey, how would you like to learn defense? Again, it still sounds risky for pick 26, but I did throw him in here because of the talent that he has, I reckon. So I wouldn't mind it. Again, maybe similar to Harrison Oliver, he's maybe not a guy we pull the trigger on at 26. But if it gets to pick 40 and a club's not going to use their pick and we trade a future third for it and end up with this guy, then I think that would be a fairly good outcome. But again, a lot of this depends on how the first pick goes. So, if we draft a key back at pick 12, which is probably unlikely, but if we did, then we probably overlook another key position player. If we draft a wingman, we probably don't go wingman with this selection. To be honest, we probably could use a couple. If we draft inside mid with the first selection, we probably don't go for a Tom Gross, for instance. If we draft a halfback flanker, we probably don't go Harrison Oliver. So all of those things come into it for me. So having said all that, what is my ideal combination of two players? Well, Cooper Hines probably seems a little unlikely at this point. But if you gave us Toby Travalia or Xavier Lindsay at our first pick, or even Bo Allen, those are probably the three at the moment that I'm hoping for at our first pick. Do we supplement that with a Hamish Davis at pick 30? Kind of like the mix of that, Xavier Lindsay or Toby Travalia and Hamish Davis. Then use a future third to trade back in and draft a key position defender, whether it be Guerin as a player who we can turn into a key back. It always sounds risky, and I'd be relying on the recruiters to have their own educated opinion on his ability to transform into a defender. But I think if you've got speed and aerial ability as a tall man, you probably can make that switch. But it doesn't have to be him. So if we had a key back in the third round, get Travalia, Hamish Davis. I think that's a pretty decent draft result. But again, my opinion is going to change between now and the draft because I'm going to go full bore on analysing all these players. So like I said, keep an eye out on this channel. Make sure you subscribe. Check out True Footy if you want to see more draft content as well. I'm going to continue to shape my own opinion over time, but let me know in the comments what you're currently thinking. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.